For a while now on this channel, I've overanalyzed the number of anime openings, but endings on the other hand, not so much. And a series that's been noticeably absent on this channel is Delicious in Dungeon, mostly because I'm waiting for season 2 to drop for view synergy. But I'm tired of waiting. Let's game in 2 dragons with 1 Kensuke and take a crack at overanalyzing Dungeon Meshi season 1's first ending to see what delectable hidden details we can find. Despite its simplicity, I really love what Trigger did with Dungeon Meshi's first ED, Party. Although the ending is basically a glorified slideshow, the storybook aesthetic of Party helps the ED to stand out from other anime endings, a quality also shared by the second season 1 ED, Twinkling Ash. The structure of the ending follows a reverse shot setup where each new image switches sides to create a cohesive flow for the audience, with the credits also swapping sides as if the viewer is flipping through a physical book. While that may seem obvious, what you may not know is that this ED is actually a prequel to the first episode, as we see the party gradually assemble throughout the ending, with each party member making their way to the dungeon entrance, which may have also been inspired by a Dungeon Meshi Harda extra, where the party struggles to venture deeper into the dungeon because of Laios' poor time and resource management skills, with certain stills in this ending directly referencing a handful of panels from this bonus material. Going from the Adventurer's Bible, it's also pretty clear this isn't the party's first expedition due to the roster undergoing a number of changes before Marcel was recruited. Also weirdly, Laios' room is mirrored in the ED, but I suppose that continuity error can be explained by the party staying at different inns between expeditions. What we can gather from the anime's version of Laios' room is that he has a tendency to collect trophies from monsters slain in the dungeon. Makes sense. However, there's a slight problem with Laios' trophies. I have no idea what monster this horn is supposed to come from. At this point in time, the lowest floor the party has reached is the 4th floor at most, given how they encountered the red dragon on the 5th floor in episode 1, and well, we know how that goes. Looking at all the possible monsters the party could have fought at this point in time also doesn't help, as literally none of them have horns that even remotely resemble the one Laios has. The closest resemblance comes from a bicorn, but there's literally no way the party could have canonically fought a bicorn before the red dragon. The only reasonable answer that works in canon is that Laios somehow bought a bicorn horn from someone on the island's surface, but even that answer falls apart unless somehow a party managed to bypass the Kensuke door on the 6th floor, which can't happen, or somehow a vendor imported a bicorn horn from a different dungeon. Thank you, Trigger, for this canonically ambiguous horn. There also appears to either be a stick or fragment of an antler right next to the mysterious horn. A yellow ball of fluff, which could be from literally any monster or animal. These claws could be from the back of a basilisk's legs, snake skin maybe, some direwolf fur, and a femur bone. Other than Laios' room being a little messy, the only noteworthy talking point left is that you can see Fallon walking by in the streets below. That's kinda neat. Flipping over to Chilchuck, who we find sipping a non-specific drink that's most definitely alcoholic, by the shore watching a group of half-foots trying to salvage their goods as their ship sinks. This illustration is a really solid character study of Chilchuck's personality prior to episode 13. A cold and self-centered person who is unwilling to support others unless he gets a cut of money for himself. The true hustler of the party. On the topic, we find Marcel buying fruit at the local market on the island, with a small group of kitted up adventurers in the background, one of which heavily mirrors Fallon in both design and weapon of choice. Interesting. We catch up with Fallon on a hike, with flower in hand and observing a seagull accompanied by a pretty scenic view of the island's surface. The framing of this illustration is really unique, almost like a trail cam in the bushes capturing the moment, with the focus not being on Fallon, but the beauty of the island's scenery. It's honestly a surprising standout from this ending. However, to contrast this beautiful view, we find Namari in a tavern, 3 drinks and 5 meals deep, seemingly drowning her sorrows, as 3 other doors talk behind her back. The reason for this sorrow actually comes from the Adventurer's Bible, as we learn that Namari's dad raided the island governor's vault and mysteriously disappeared during the night, which resulted in Namari getting exiled from her clan for severely damaging the dwarven reputation on the island. To make amends for her father's betrayal, she joins Laios' party to rack up enough money in order to pay back the governor in the hopes of being allowed to rejoin her clan. This illustration is a direct reference to the last 3 panels of her Adventurer's Bible comic, with the doors in the background most likely gossiping about Namari's dad and the same barmaids working behind the counter. The bells hanging on the tree branch in the background are often gestures of warding off negative influences, which doesn't seem to be effective judging by Namari's dejected mood. Towards the end of the day, Shuro is on a stroll at the docks with a group of children passing him by, accompanied by a loyal companion. If you look closely though, you can spot Maizuru spying on Shuro alone alone, with Hien, Benichidori, Tade, and Izutsume close behind. While this is probably a bit of a stretch, each child and dog reflects Shuro's party. The three kids on the right represent Hien, Benichidori, and Tade, while the singular child on the left represents Maizuru, and their dog being a clear stand-in for Izutsume. The gap between the children could also reflect how Maizuru is always ahead when it comes to protecting Shuro, while the dog running ahead represents Izutsume becoming a permanent addition to Laios' party later in the season. And people say my Attack on Titan analysis is too far-fetched. At the end of the day, Marcel, Fallon, and Laios meet up for dinner in a packed tavern with the trio deep in discussion. The following illustration finds itself in center frame, with Marcel, Fallon, and Laios toasting over dinner, presumably in preparation for tomorrow's dungeon expedition. The use of center framing emphasizes the celebration of dinner, as well as visually supporting the lyrics, which bolsters this trio's friendship that we rarely see outside of spin-offs and extra material because of, you know. As a heads up, the following two sections have some pretty major spoilers for the Delicious in Dungeon manga. The illustrations return to being on one side of the frame, with a group retrieving a wyvern corpse from an area of the dungeon exposed to the surface. There's also several winged lion statues in a circle surrounding the wyvern, which may be foreshadowing towards the party's battle with Thistle in chapter 69. You could maybe stretch that this illustration also foreshadows the treacherous nature of the winged lion later in the manga. Oh, and Senshi's also here, with a walking mushroom in his backpack. This illustration is also in a weird canon limbo, as we never see a section of the dungeon exposed this close to the surface, and it also doesn't make sense for a wyvern to be this high up in the dungeon. Now you could argue that this is still in the dungeon, as the sky is portrayed as a white void, which doesn't line up with the other surface illustrations in the ending. But how are they getting a crane into the dungeon then? We return to the surface as we see Marcel and Fallon cross through a large flock of sheep and a random pig to get to the dungeon's entrance. Very in character for Marcel to be freaking out, while Fallon is completely nonchalant about the situation. This random ass pig may also point to the illustration, foreshadowing the disguises the demon takes on to tempt the various dungeon lords, as he took on the disguise of a pig to get the first settlers of the dungeon to worship him as a god, and appearing as a lamb to trick Mithrin into creating his own dungeon. Both Marcel and Fallon are also largely affected by the demon's actions throughout the manga, with Fallon becoming a chimera and Marcel also becoming a dungeon lord. Bravo, Studio Trigger. In the background, there appears to be a tree branch hanging from the door of the shack, which is typically used to ward off evil spirits, making the demon symbolism more believable. After the animals crossing, see what I did there? Fallon and Marcel catch up with the rest of the party, waiting by the dungeon's entrance with a classic Marcel expression and low quality Chilchuck looking pissed.
Dead fucking serious.
I really do love each party member's facial expression in this illustration. The framing of this illustration is also really neat, with the lighting getting progressively brighter towards the dungeon's entrance. If we want to get deep and serious again, Marcel being stuck in Fallon's shadow could symbolize the party's never-ending chase to get Fallon back throughout their dungeon exploration. The penultimate illustration in this ending features the party about to delve into the deep dark belly of the dungeon, as Chilchuck reprimands Marcel for being late, and Shuro looking mildly upset with Fallon. Namari's skull helmet and Laios' shield make their triumphant return after being completely forgotten about after the first episode. And to bring this ending to a close, we finish on a center frame illustration of the party's leftover dishes, a fitting conclusion to Delicious in Dungeon's first ending. Overall, Party is a very solid ED in concept, but personally, I feel like the visuals could lean harder into the storybook aesthetic, and maybe feature some animation of the page being turned to add a transition between each illustration, because as it is, this ending is basically a glorified PowerPoint featuring some very appealing artwork to accompany. Even the lyrics could potentially line up better with the on-screen visuals, but at the same time, you run the risk of having an imbalance of how long each illustration remains on screen for. In a perfect world, this ending would have visuals akin to Requiem der Morgenrot from Attack on Titan Season 3. But even as is, this ending isn't the worst, and at the very least, Twinkling Ash creates some unique parallels between both Season 1 endings, which would probably be hard to do if both EDs were fully animated. Plus, the animation quality alone for Season 1 more than enough makes up for the lack of animated endings. You get a pass this one time, Studio Trigger, but please don't let it happen again.